The first deadline in the Conservative leadership race has barely come and gone, but we're already just 3 weeks away from the second and final deadline. 8 candidates passed the first hurdle. They submitted 1,000 signatures, a $25,000 fee, and got approval from the leadership's organizing committee. They have until March 25th now to submit a further 2,000 signatures and $275,000. Both Peter MacKay and Erin O'Toole have handed all of that in, and they're considered, quote, verified candidates. Jim Karahalios is a Conservative leadership hopeful. He joins us now from Toronto. Hi, Mr. Karahalios. Great to have you on the show.
Hi, Vashi. Thanks for having me.
In preparation for the interview, I was looking through a lot of your leadership materials, and what jumped out at me was that you've criticized quite often and consistently what you call the red Tory establishment, and you've insisted that you're going to be an alternative. What do you mean by that term, red Tory establishment?
Well, we've got a race here that's a red Tory coronation, where the rules are being set up in a quick race to the advantage of Erin O'Toole and Peter MacKay. And if anyone follows Ontario politics and the backroom boys running Conservative politics in Ontario, there's a disconnect between the establishment and Conservative voters and Conservative Party members. And I'm getting in this race because we need a fighter to take on Justin Trudeau, and we need a blue Conservative who's not part of the red Tory establishment, who's not out of touch with Conservative voters and voters in Canada, to beat Justin Trudeau. And that's why I'm in this race. It's going to be a big challenge to get past the March 25th hurdle of $300,000 in donations. But we've got a lot of support across the country, over 180 ridings, signatures, and counting. We're quickly approaching the 3,000. And we're in this race to offer Conservative voters what they want, which is a real Conservative in this race that's going to represent the grassroots. And it's going to clean up politics, not only in the Conservative Party, but in Ottawa. And the message to the Conservative establishment and the Liberal establishment will be clear from my race.
Are you going to make that $300,000?
You know, it's a new thing in Canadian politics to see such a high threshold just to get your name on the ballot. We're quickly raising money. My fear is we may run out of time because there's only 3 weeks left. If it was signatures and votes and endorsements, I'd be on the final ballot. But it would be a real shame in this race if there are only 2 candidates, Peter MacKay and Erin O'Toole, both red Tories on the ballot, and there will be a lot of unhappy Conservative Party members if that's the case.
How far are you from 300,000?
Well, look, you're asking me to give you the details.
I sure am.
If any of the watchers want to donate, it's going well. We're getting a lot of support. We could always use more donations. It's a shame that you've got to buy your way onto a ballot in a democratic process. I've always been for open and public elections, whether those be nominations, leadership races, and obviously in general elections. This is a weird one where we've got a $300,000 buy-in in a very short period of time. Erin O'Toole and Peter MacKay's campaigns, you know, they had one hand was the knife that they plunged in Andrew Scheer's back, and in the other hand, they were collecting checks on Bay Street to get in this race. For a grassroots Conservative, that's from the outside, that's not part of the establishment, it's very difficult to get in the race.
There is a limit to the donations, though, right?
$16.25, that's correct.
Yeah, so that's not necessarily only Bay Street, to be fair to them.
Well, I don't know, you'd have to ask them, but you see their teams made up of insiders on Bay Street. It's not really hard to go up and down Bay Street a couple of times. You can pick up quite a few checks. If you're from the outside, though, you're not well connected, you're not the son of a former politician as Peter MacKay and Erin O'Toole are. It's a lot tougher, even logistically, to get the money from all over Canada. It's a tough thing to do in 3 weeks.
Let me ask you from a policy perspective. If you're saying that they're the same, they're red Tories, what kind of policies are going to differentiate you from them? I'd start, for example, on you're against the carbon tax. I read a lot about that in your material. They're all saying that they're against the carbon tax, too. So how will you distinguish yourself from them on a policy basis?
Well, you know my history, Vashi, if you read up on me. I started the Axe the Carbon Tax campaign, advocated for that in Ontario. I advocated against ballot box stuffing in internal party races. Peter MacKay and Erin O'Toole back then were fine promoting Patrick Brown and his carbon tax plan. After I joined the race, they said finally they came around to remembering there's a carbon tax question in our party. But it's not just about the carbon tax. We also have to clean up government. We have to get Canada out of the Paris Accord. I'm the only candidate in this race from Peter MacKay, Erin O'Toole, Leslyn Lewis, Marilyn Gladu, Derek Sloan. No one's calling to get out of the Paris Accord. I was the first candidate in this race to say we've got to put an end to the blockades we're seeing across the country that are shutting down our economy by inserting in the criminal code legislation that says if you want to target infrastructure projects and shut them down, that's a crime. Erin O'Toole jumped on that bandwagon 5 hours later.
Isn't it already a crime?
No, it's illegal based on certain statutes, but it needs to be inserted in the criminal code, and Erin O'Toole agrees.
Is that
so those are two of the issues that I've released. I'm releasing policies every week, and we're going to have policies on cleaning up politics in this country and cleaning up government.
Let me circle back to the Paris Accord. Are you worried by removing, what is the point in removing us from the Paris Accord? Aren't those targets that should be there? Shouldn't we be trying to reduce carbon emissions in this country?
Well, some conservative politicians have tried to have it both ways in this country, where on the one hand, they want to tell voters they're against the carbon tax, and you'll see politicians that switch their stance on that because of the movement of the Axe the Carbon Tax campaign and others. And then at the same time, they want to say they're for the Paris Accord. I got involved in this party when Stephen Harper took a principal stand against the Kyoto Accord, which was the predecessor or the preceding document to the Paris Accord. If you're for the Paris Accord, you are in favor of carbon taxes. You are in favor of putting a price on carbon, and that is an impact on Canadian sovereignty, that is going to drive jobs out of Canada, that is going to also hinder our ability to develop our economy further. And we need a strong Western-based economy, and the Conservative Party has a strong Western foundation. And for all those reasons, we need to get out of the Paris Accord.
So let me get this straight, though. If you remove Canada from the Paris Accord, are you in favor of reducing emissions in this country, or are you saying that you will sort of abdicate yourself from that goal?
Every industry in Canada are leaders on environmental standards and reducing emissions. They're way ahead of government on this. Every barrel of oil that stays in the ground in Canada is worse for the environment because it means extraction of a barrel of oil in another country, probably with poor environmental standards. And we are leaders in industry in this, and we have to get back to an environmental plan that is drill, build pipelines from coast to coast. And on the question of climate change, we need to adapt to protect our citizens.
Do you believe in climate change, and do you believe that human activity is contributing to it?
There's plenty of science that shows climate change is occurring. There's science that shows man contributes to it. And the key obligation of government is to adapt and manage it and protect its citizens.
But let me take you on that point, challenge you for a second, because if you're adapting, I mean, it costs money to mitigate the effects of climate change, right? The Insurance Bureau of Canada, for example, says Canadian insurers are now facing claims of natural catastrophes, floods, forest fires, other extreme weather events of approximately $1 billion annually. That's up from $400 million annually in previous decades. So, you know, from a fiscally conservative point of view, if you're going to stop doing things that reduce carbon emissions in this country at the federal level, you're going to pay a lot more to mitigate the effects of climate change.
We are not achieving the targets in the Paris Accord. We are spending money and wasting time to accomplish targets that we are not meeting and that international players are not meeting. And industry is leading on environmental standards and reducing emissions. And the key thing is, if the climate is changing and there's an impact on our citizens, we have to quickly adapt, because it's too risky to play around with targets and legislation and global legislation that we're not going to achieve. And then after we tax industry and tax Canadians across the country, we're going to say, well, we did our best, but the international community didn't catch up. And so, you know, it didn't really work out.
But what does adapt mean? When you say adapt, what does that mean?
Well, for starters, we need to develop better infrastructure. We need to have the resources and also the guidance from the government to ensure that people are living in areas where, when the climate is changing, they're not living in floodplains. They are not living in vulnerable areas, where they have the assistance from government when they're impacted by the change of climate. That
costs a lot of money.
Well, that is the reality of the situation, because we're not meeting the targets. So it's dishonest of politicians, it's dishonest of Erin O'Toole and Peter MacKay to say it would be nice to stay in the Paris Accord because those are aspirational targets, when they know we are not achieving those targets. And Justin Trudeau knows that we are not achieving those targets.
But is it not worth trying then? If you're not going to meet the targets, it's not even worth trying to reduce emissions?
What is important is that we try to protect our citizens, not sugarcoat it and say we've signed the Paris Accord, so we've done our job on the environment, And it really is a gloss over of the entire environmental portfolio, because politicians use it as a backup plan to say, I've done my part, I've signed the Paris Accord, we're putting a carbon tax in, and that's all there is to it. So it's a global problem or a global question what we're talking about here, and Canada contributes 1%. And it's interesting that recently a study was shown that in the United States, where they don't have a carbon tax, they're actually reducing emissions at a faster rate than we are. So adaptation has to be a key point of the analysis, and it's being completely ignored.
Okay, I have to leave it there. I'm out of time, but thank you so much for your time, Mr. Karahalios. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I look forward to stopping the red Tory coronation.
So that is Tory leadership hopeful Jim Karahalios. Tim, I'm preparing for the interview. I was reading through everything. Two big things for him that stick out. One, he's very, very anti-carbon tax. The other, he talks about this red Tory establishment all the time. And he explains what he means by that in our interview. But again, delineating.
And you're pointing at me. No, I probably could be the red Tory establishment.
Yeah, delineate. But I mean, it's echoing what we are hearing thematically through this race, this sort of division. I'm not a red Tory. Everyone's trying to say that they're not. They're more blue. What is that? What does that say to you?
Well, first of all, in every Conservative leadership race, dating back to the last one Peter MacKay won in 2003, there's been a designated poop disturber. And Mr. Karahalios fits that description here. And with reason. Look, I think there's a place. I'm glad he's in the race. I may not agree with anything he says, but it does force you to react. It does force you to understand. There still are lines of division, at least in the rhetoric, around who is controlling the party. You've seen Aaron O'Toole Aaron O'Toole in 2020 is not Aaron O'Toole of 2017, because he's trying to play off that, because in the past, you might argue Aaron O'Toole could be part of that red Tory establishment. That's Aaron's choice for this campaign. Peter is running away from it a little bit as well. I don't know why. I think he should embrace it a little bit more, but welcome to the CPC 2020. It's only going to get messier.
Yeah, I mean, he is the horror nightmare for all Conservatives. The Freddy Krueger kind of linking. He's a very litigious candidate. He has run a crusade against Patrick Brown in the past, targeted Christine Elliott, even sued the PC Ontario Party.
Successfully, I think.
Yeah. So he is a bit of a troublemaker or a poop disturber, whatever the word it was that you just used.
The sanitized CBC version.
Yeah. But I think you always have to ask yourself, for each candidate that gets in the race, and this race is quite large, even though they wanted it to be small, it's up to 8 candidates. At this point, it's still 8. It's still 8. It's going to be winnowed for sure, but it's still at 8 right now. You have to ask what people want, right? So obviously, MacKay wants to win. O'Toole wants to win too, but he also wants down ballot support. Other candidates want some name recognition, maybe further placement in the party. For this candidate, what I think he wants was to get to second level, which means he will get the Conservative Party list. That means access to campaign across the country, to broaden his Axe the Carbon Tax campaign across the country, not just limited to Ontario.
I'm going to be really quick here. I think the Conservative Party is in the brink of trying to split itself either as a really conservative, small blue, socially conservative party, or if it still wants to fight with the Liberals for that, sort of mushy right of center part of the spectrum. It's going to be an interesting race to watch. Peter MacKay is, I think, more of we are a modern party, more of the progressive conservative, and a lot of the people who are now running against him are trying to really bring the party further to the right, if I can put it that way, to make it more conservative, and we'll see who ultimately wins.
Amanda, what do you think?
Well, I always find it funny when you watch leadership races and you see there's always one, like the candidate who's going to come in and who is going to say the most egregious things, and there's no such thing as the high row. It's like, how many low blows can I deliver? But there's such a problem in doing that because it has the halo effect of the entire party. You're talking about backstabbing and what's happening behind the scenes, and it gives this sort of nasty vibe for what's happening to the party. So big challenge when you have a candidate that's so vocal, so outspoken, headline driven. Like, these are very entertaining lines that people want to cover, and yet the problem with it is that it leaves people feeling kind of like about the party itself.
Shachi, your take on especially that sort of rush for the blue side of the party?
I adore you, Chris, but I have to disagree on this one. So, buried underneath the big takeaway around Trudeau's approval numbers in our polling today is a vote intention number. And what really struck me about that is that at the end of the day, despite this this right, super right kind of push and pull that we're seeing, is that 34% of Canadians still say that they would vote Conservative if an election were held tomorrow. And that is well above the Liberals at 26%. 6%, above the NDP at 21%. So the motivation among Conservative voters, regardless of who is leading this party, and by the way, they're not even happy with the guy they've got now. They can't wait to get rid of Andrew Scheer. But despite that, they are still choosing the party and the dream, the hope, the aspiration of kicking Justin Trudeau out of government. And that is what holds them together. At the end of the day, we are going to have a lot of conversations about right, left, values divides, other divides, regional divides. But ultimately, they're in it to win it. And I get the sense that they really don't care who's going to be there.
Quick rejoinder.
Very quickly,
winning the party is one thing. Winning the country is entirely different.
Agreed.
And thank goodness it'll give us months and months of things to talk about. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to our power panel tonight. Shachi Kurl, Amanda Alvaro, Tim Bowers, Kathleen Monk, and Chris Hall. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.